All right, with our endpoint now set up and ready to serve data to us, we just need to set up a way to retrieve that data. Now I'm back here on the index page, and I decided after some consideration that we actually aren't going to need to use any PHP in here. So I named it back to index.html. If it's not going to use PHP, you are better off naming it with just the HTML extension. Now, what do we want to do here? We'd like to be able to bring in this data. We'd like to list the data out in some form so that people could then click on one of them and get a little more information. As we do that, we'd also like to be able to split the data into pages so that we only load a few of the items rather than all of them at once. So, in order to get set up to do that, I'm actually going to go back to some of the page items that we made back for the homework module in Unit 2. Now, while there are many ways that you can create these buttons, I found the pagination system from Bootstrap to actually be pretty nice. Here's the way I made it work in Module 2.4. Here we come in, we have a row class. Row classes are part of the container, and it basically says that this should all be a single row across the normal grid. Within that I put a single column that will stay at full width all the way down to the extra small size, which is the phone size. And then we have an unordered list that's marked as pagination. Then we put in all of these LIs that have a single A inside them. That can be marked with the page numbers or with the, this is the double less than or the double greater than. And these were just values that I got from Bootstrap's own examples on these. So this ultimately allows us to set up a certain number of pages. Now we already determined that if we're going to do 40 per page, we only have 5 pages. So we should only need those 5. And with that being said, let's go ahead and save it, and you'll see here how they come up. Now, one other thing I found as I was working on Unit 2.4 is that I wanted these to be centered, and I found I had to use a little bit of CSS to do that. Let's pull up our CSS file. I'm not going to bother to use Sass to do this. We'll just write it right into CSS, and we'll make this class centered. To do this, we need to set the margin system to be automatic. That will cause it to try and build up margins to fit the data into a certain width. But in order to get it to actually center, we have to tell it what we want that width to be. So I can say something to the effect of max width equals 400 px. And then it will try and get this out in a much more centered kind of manner. Now, the best thing we can do is try and hit the actual size of it. If we hit the actual size of it, that should keep it centered. 200's too small. Let's try 300. 300 is pretty close. That still seems a bit too big, though. If I were being really picky here, I could figure this out exactly. There we go. 260 seems pretty darn well. Good. And that keeps it right near the center there. You certainly don't have to do that, but I thought it was a nice thing to do. And we're trying to put everything to work here, so that's one other thing we can do. Now you notice these do light up, but they don't show the little pointer button, and there's a reason for that. That's something that we can end up fixing in our JavaScript later on. I would like them to have the little finger pointer as well on there. Now the other thing I've found is that when you are shown these pagination options, very often they give you the pages both at the top and at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in here twice. And in the middle of it, we'll have our actual sort of user information. So I'll have ID equals customers, right? Because they're customers. And that'll be where our customer data can go. And we'll be filling that in with JavaScript, so we don't need to put anything in it right now. But I would like to have these 2 pages here. However, as soon as I do that, notice we were using IDs here before. If I'm going to have 2 of them, they can't be IDs. Instead, we're going to have to change all those IDs to classes. We'll do a little bit of find replace action to try and make this go quickly. ID equals, and let's make sure it does it within the selection only, otherwise it'll replace too many things. Let's change that to class equals. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, let's come down here and do it again, only in this selection. Selection, and then replace. There we go. So by making them classes, I can now have multiple tags that have those same classes and treat them essentially equivalently. This will make the code later on easier because I can respond to the button that has that particular class rather than the one that has the ID. And if I was doing it with IDs, there would be two different IDs for buttons that should be doing the same thing, and I would still have to repeat their code. So the last thing we really need to be thinking of here is, how are we actually going to show these customers? Well, in this case, I kind of would like to show them in a sort of data list. And I'm going to go ahead and put in some information in here just to visualize it so they can see how the page is going to be structured before I change to where I'm generating it using JavaScript. Now, in the end, it will be generated via JavaScript. But it's good to sort of make a dummy couple of entries first, just to confirm that it works the way you expect. What I'm going to do here, actually, is set up another one of these lists that we've seen before. These are the bootstrapped list groups. So I'm going to say list group here. And notice, previously we did this with a UL, and then the items in the middle were LIs, and those were labeled as list groups. But in fact, you don't have to do that. As long as the class is set to the right thing, it will make it look correct, regardless of whether you actually have an LI or a UL tag in use. Furthermore, if we do it right, we'll actually be able to make things look even nicer. So let's come in here and let's go ahead and say div class equals list group item. And then inside of that, we can actually do multiple things. We don't have to have just the data. We can have, of course, let's put in my name, set barrier. And then we would have Menominee, Wisconsin, 54751. This would be one person's information. Now, if we send it in like that, it's going to look very unformatted, and that's not what we want. But we can actually do a little bit better. Here we can split the data into two things. Let's make this one be a low-level heading with the class list group item heading. And you'll note this is one that the lookup doesn't even know about, but that's okay. And then similarly down here, we can create a tag with the class list group item text. And so here we have a heading and then more normal text inside of it. And if we do that, it now spaces it out to look a little more stylized. We have the person, and then underneath that we have their city, state, and zip code. So this is how I would like to structure my entries. We will have our main list group, and then we will list each of the entries in this type of a style. Now, it wouldn't do any good to continue on here and put more of the entries in at this point. It would just be fake data. We have real data to use, so we might as well now start getting in a position to use it. We're going to be doing this in JavaScript, so let's set up to actually bring in a script. We'll just stick with the usual index.js, and then give ourselves a new file and save it in the public file folder as, namely, index.js. This is not the right public folder. There we go. Now, one of the first things I want to be able to do when I come over here, it's very common that we go ahead and do the whole document.ready so that we can execute any sort of final setup that we need for the page. And we certainly do here. We would need to do a few different things in order to make sure that this is all working correctly. Now, one of the things that we could consider here is the creation of these pagination items here. They need a little bit of work after they've been created. Namely, we need to go through and give them events to run when they're clicked. They also need to have some styling applied to them so that they show the pointer whenever we roll over them. Now, we could opt, in fact, to generate all of these over here in the code. Now, why would that be a good idea? Well, ultimately, you can see there's obviously repeated things going on. But also, if we allow the user to be able to adjust how many things are going to be listed on a page, then the total number of pages would also need to adjust. Let's go ahead and see how we might do that. We create a function that is build paginator, and let's take in as an option max page. And so this will go through and just build one of these paginators for us. We've got 2 of them out to some max page. And we can go through and basically create it very much in the style that we have here. Let's say that it comes in, we'll just start it right here where we get that call extra small 12. And then from there on out, we would create all the other bits and pieces that we need to go inside of this. So if I come over here, I basically need to generate this kind of code from inside of my JavaScript. Now we've seen this before. This is probably most easily done with jQuery. And we simply tell it what kind of tag we want to create. And then you can actually add text or classes really easy as you create it. I'm going to go ahead and add the class that I need here right away, which is that call extra small 12. And this is going to be my, we'll call it outer div. This is the outermost div. Then we need to create the actual UL. So $sign and EUL here. So we create that new one. And it also needs a class, namely paginator, however you want to say it. We also need to keep this around. So we'll call this the list tag equals that. At that point, we would then just need to loop over and create tags that look like this. Now, this is actually a little bit complex, isn't it? It's got an anchor tag on the inside and then an li on the outside. It's just complex enough that I'd kind of like to make a function for it, even though that might seem a little bit piddly. I think it'll save us a little bit of time to do that. So I'm going to call this build page button. And the only things that will change on this is each one will have a different class, and then it will have different text in it. So let's say that we pass in the class name and the text. So what do we need to do then to build this button? We would need to first create, let's create the li. Actually, let's create the anchor tag first, the inside thing first. So we'll go jQuery a, and then we're going to say dot add class, and the class will be whatever class name we passed in from up here. Then we can also just go right ahead and say dot text, and now we've created the full a tag. We'll say let link tag equal that. Then we can build up our other final tag that we need here, namely the li tag. It doesn't need anything on it. So we can in fact immediately just say dot, or we can just store that to a variable, let item equal that, and then item dot append, because we're going to add in the link tag as a child, and then return item. And that should create what we're looking for. Now I can tell you I've already gone through this process myself, and I learned one hard lesson here. When you are sending in text that looks like this, where it's that escape sequence that starts with an and ends with a semicolon, that actually has to be interpreted as HTML or it won't look correct. So right here we need to say HTML and set it as if it were HTML rather than text, even though most of the pages buttons we're going to be making will in fact just be plain old text. All right, now we need to go ahead and create a few of those buttons. So we can say build page button, and we want to build one that has page previous as the class, and then has this funny escape sequence for its text. And that'll get us the previous button. And we basically just say list tag dot append. Go ahead and just append it right into the list tag, because that's where it's going to go. Next, we need to loop. We're going to need to go ahead and loop. We'll say let I equals 0, I is less than max page, I plus plus. And then we just need to go through and create these buttons for each of those pages. It's going to be page and then $I, and we'll have to put that in the backticks so that it can interpret it as a template string. And then here we just pass in I as the text, because that's all we really need to put inside of the button. Lastly, we need the next page button. So page next for me, and where's it going to go? It's going to have that right arrows. There we go. Lastly, we need to go ahead and put that into the outer div. So we say outer div.append list tag, and we return the outer div. So there we go. This is a way that we can go through and make these. Now, I actually don't need the outer div till later, so let's just bring it down here to right where we use it. We build the list tag, we put all the buttons inside the list, we build the outer div and put the list tag inside it, and return that outer div. So this will have the exact same structure as what we had over here, but we're making it programmatically. Now what do? Well, we can take out this structure. I'm just going to comment it out for now. And then let's give this an ID. I'll call this top paginator. And what do? Up here, when we're ready, we'll go ahead and pull out our top paginator, and we will say .append, and we will append to that build paginator up to page 5, like that. Let's see what happens. Okay, well, we got somewhere here. We'll need to figure out what happened. First of all, that is not the top paginator, it's the bottom paginator. And so let's rename that. So, I probably misspelled this name here. Well, because it's pagination, not paginator. I was probably thinking Terminator or something here. There we go. Now, you can see one other problem that we have here. It's numbering them 0 to 4. Well, that's because I did my loop as a traditional loop here from 0 to 4. Let's go ahead and make it just go from 1 all the way out to the actual max page. And there we go. Then we get the results we expect. We can then come back here and do the exact same thing up top. So I would go through and delete these things and then give this one an ID equal to top paginator. I'm going to keep calling it paginator when I can, but the class is obviously pagination. I like paginator though. And now, so now it's gone because we took it out, but let's go ahead and then put the call in over here to build it. Now you may say to yourself, why bother? Well, as I pointed out, this would allow the user to be able to control their the number of items that were in a page, so that the actual number of pages can be dynamic here. Also, it's good practice. This is often how we like to approach things when we're programmers. We like to think of a dynamic way to do it so that we can afford a more dynamic page experience should the need arise. In the real working environment, you probably wouldn't do this unless you knew for a fact you were going to need to be able to change those total page numbers. Now, the other reason that this can become useful is that we can come down here and actually fix up these things as we create them. Here, as we create the anchor tag, you'll notice here it does still give us the nice blue color. It is giving us what we want, but it's not giving us the pointer that we would like it to have. We can fix that right here. We can actually say .css on the list item, and what we need to do is set cursor to pointer. And that's just the jQuery way of setting these things. And now when we go over it, we should see our pointer cursor. And there we go. So you can see here now that it gives us just the right thing, as long as I spell cursor correctly. So now it truly is giving us the performance that we'd expect. So the other thing that we need to be able to add to these as we have them set up here, we need to give them some sort of actual function to run when we click on them. Right here when we make the link tag, we have the option to do that. I can say .click and then give it some sort of function to run. And that function can be basically the set page function. So let's go ahead and call it that, or we'll call it change page. And then we'll write that function somewhere else here. So that builds our page buttons. Let's go ahead and build the change page button. Now we're passing this into a click, which means it receives an event object if we need to use it. We might in the end not need to use it, but we'll see here. I think we will. I think we actually need to know what button this came from in order to be able to correctly load the right page that we want here. When the page changes, we'd like to update the situation. But we're going to need to store some sort of global information about what page we are actually on. I'm going to create a variable just called curPage, and we will set that equal to 1 initially because we start on the first page. Let's also create a variable maxPage that tells us what the last page is. In our case, 5. We're only going through 5 pages. We can now then use that variable right here, maxPage. We can also do a few other things. Right here, when we run this change page event, we're going to want to examine what button it was that was clicked. Now we're putting the onClick function on the A tag because that's really where it wants to be. The A tags, the link tags, are the things that are clicked. So when we examine event here, we can look at event.target, and that will in fact be the link itself, the link tag. Let's go ahead and surround that in jQuery so that we get the actual jQuery object and not just the raw event object, which is less useful. Now with that, we could go through and say, okay, what was it that I clicked? All we really have to do is say if button.hasClass, I'm going to say hasClass because remember we named these with classes, and if it has the class pagePrevious, then that means we were supposed to back up. So we would want to say curPage --. Else, if it has the class page next, then we should have moved forward. So curPage ++. In all other cases, it's one of those numerical buttons. And to know what the curPage is going to be, all we actually have to do is just look at the text. We can say button.text. It's also important that this remain a number, so let's go ahead and make sure we cast it to just that. We'll say number button.text. That will then pull it out and set the current page to be that particular number. Now anytime this happens, the current page changes, we want to make sure that the paginator bar actually stays in sync with that. It should show which one is currently active, and if we're all the way back on page 1, it really needs to disable the previous button. And similarly, when we're on page 5, it should disable the next button. We can do all of that. So let's create a function that would be responsible for that. Update page button state. All this is going to do is look at whatever the current page is and update the button state according to that. So let's say here if curPage equals 1, then we need to disable the previous page button. So we would want to grab everything that has the class pagePrevious, and technically what we actually want is its parent. Because it's the li item that when we disable it will look correctly. And we're going to want to say add class disabled. Else if curPage equals max page, whatever the last page is, then we want to do that for page next. We want to make sure that we add the class disabled. The other thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we highlight the particular button that is associated with the actual page. Well, this is something that we can pull out again using the class, but we're going to need a template string to do it. So we'll say page, and then we actually embed curPage right in there. And we want to say add class active. So disabled and active are things that we can put on these pagination buttons, and that will give us the ability to show which page is currently active or disable one of these buttons, exactly like we're doing here. So to get things started, let's go ahead and do update page button state right here. This ensures that the state of the buttons is in sync with the initial state of the page. Let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. So as we go through here, it now should have disabled the previous button, and it did. It did not activate button 1 though, so we should take a look at that. All right. Of course, just like here where we add disabled to the parent, we actually need to do that here as well. We need to add active to the parent of the one that has the class on it. And there we go. Now it's doing what we expect. The other place that we really need to make sure update page button state is called is whenever, of course, we change the page. So let's do that. Namely, anywhere that we're going to wind up changing the current page or where current page gets reassigned, we need to call update page button state so that they stay in sync with one another. Now, as we go through here, you'll notice if we come over to here, it lights this one up. But it didn't take away the previous states. The back button is still disabled, and button 1 is also still showing active. So let's see if we can clean this up a little bit. Basically what we need to do is remove any prior disabled or active things. There's a really easy way we can do this. We can come in and say anything that has an LI class, we will go ahead and remove the class disabled and active before we go in to change anything else. So all of our LIs will have this applied to them. Now if we were going to have a whole bunch of LIs in this page beyond just the ones that are used for the pagination, then we might want to be a little bit more specific. In fact, we can do that. We can say dot pagination so that we start with a pagination class and then grab the children LIs from that. And that will ensure that it only applies it to LIs that are under the pagination class. Now you'll notice one other interesting thing happens. Even though this is disabled, it'll still let me click it. So that's the one last thing that I need to do here. Whenever this happens, the change page event, I should check to see if it's disabled. So I should say, let's actually do this after we grab the button. If the button's parent has the class disabled, remember it's the parent, then I should not let it click. So I should basically return. Return gets me out of the function, which is what I want. All right, so if I do this now, nothing works. It should be button.parent like this, .has class. There we go, that's better. And so if we come back here and it's disabled, now when I try and click it, it doesn't do it, which is what we want.